Salt Lake Comic-Con. This is great. How many people, is this their first year at Salt Lake Comic-Con? How many people? Yeah, it was crazy. I came here last year, and it was the first year of this thing, and it was like, what, 70, 80,000 people? It's amazing. Here we are, year two. It's getting even bigger. Enjoy it while you can, though, because, when, I don't know, has anyone ever been to San Diego Comic-Con? Yeah, it's insane. It sucks. It's too crowded. So right now, only the people in Utah know about this. Let's keep it that way. All of a sudden, you're going to have people from all over traveling.
Yeah, we invaded.
They're going to invade. So anyway, hi, my name is Tommy Tallarico. I've been in the video game industry for 25 years. I know, I don't look that old. And I've worked on over 300 video games, which is a Guinness World Record. They gave me the world record about 2 years ago, and they confirmed all the stuff I'd worked on. And some of the games that you may know, depending on how old you are, or how far back you go. I started in 1990, and actually the very first game I ever worked on and did the music for in audio was the original Prince of Persia by Jordan Mechner. It was the very first game I did the audio for, but before that I was actually a game tester for about 6 months and worked on a bunch of stuff. But so Prince of Persia, some of the other games I've worked on, Cool Spot, The Terminator, Earthworm Jim, Disney's Aladdin, Metroid Prime, Tony Hawk Pro Skater, the Madden Football series, Mortal Kombat, Spider-Man, James Bond games for the PlayStation, Advent Rising, which was done here in Utah, and some of the Sonic games. Unfortunately, the crappy ones, but just being honest. It's called, what the hell was the name of the game I worked on? Oh, Sonic and the Black Knight. Yeah. You give Sonic a sword, and you're pretty much jumping the shark at that point. At least he wasn't a werewolf. Anyway, so I didn't stoop that low. No, but so anyway, yes, I've been involved for over 25 years, like I said. About in 1995. I started a video game television show called The Electric Playground with my very good friend Victor Lucas, who's actually the creator and producer of the show. And I did that for 12 years. The show is actually still running. We just, last week, in fact, in Toronto, I was at the Fan Expo. We were celebrating our 20th year since that started. And then that spawned another TV show called Reviews on the Run, or as it was known here in the US, Judgment Day on G4. Yeah, that network. So, boy, did they ruin a good thing. Anyway, and then shortly after that, I started a nonprofit organization called the Game Audio Network Guild, which is a nonprofit that where all the people in video game audio, whether it's voiceovers or music and sound design, and people looking to get in the industry. So if anyone here is looking to get into doing video game audio or voiceover or music and sound design for video games, go to audiogang.org. And there's over 2,500 members worldwide, over 30 countries. All of our Japanese composer friends from Japan are there, and it's a really cool, networking place to learn about how to get into doing this, and then once you're in, how to, just hang out. And I started that in 2002, and then that same year I started Video Games Live. And yeah, how many people here have been to Video Games Live? All right, cool. For those of you who haven't been, we're playing tomorrow. You have no excuse. No, we're doing 2 shows tomorrow with the Utah Symphony. I think it's our third or fourth time back to Utah. Is it our?
Yeah, I've seen one show in Arizona.
Yeah.
This will be my
Third here. Yeah. Okay. So third time back to Salt Lake. And it's an all new show. Every year I change it. I put more games in, more content and stuff. And yeah, we have 2 shows tomorrow at the Bravenel right next door. The first one starts at 11 in the morning. I have no idea why. And the other one's at 8 o'clock at night. So anyway, so I wanted to talk to everyone about kind of the history of video game audio. And I'll put some time aside at the end, like 15 minutes or whatever. When does this end? I don't know. 6? Okay. So at quarter of, I can start to take questions or whatever too. And I also want to give away, I have our latest album and our Blu-ray, our PBS special. So I want to give away some stuff at the end too. So, what? Okay. So anyway, I got, when I first started in the industry, I was working on machines like the Game Boy, the NES, the Genesis, Sega Genesis had just come out, and the Super Nintendo wasn't out yet. And so game audio, back when I started, it wasn't really done by musicians. It was done by computer programmers, because there was no tools or methods for composers to get music into the systems. So most of the game audio that you heard back then was literally computer programmers typing notes and note lengths and note numbers into their computers. So that's why a lot of the game audio back then sounded very kind of simplistic and, you know, beep, bloop, bloop, beep, beep, bloop, bloop. You know, it's literally, if you can imagine somebody, I mean, how do you mouse click the blues? It's just not possible, you know? And so one of the things when I first got in the industry is I sat down with programmers and I said, hey, can you make me tools so that I can put music into the thing without learning how to program? And because there's something, when you have like a synthesizer or electronic keyboard, it's a system called MIDI, which stands for, what the hell does it stand for? Musical Instrument Digital Interface, MIDI. And what it is, it's basically it's a little cable that goes out of your keyboard and it sends the electronic information from a synthesizer, which is basically, so if you have 88 notes, if you hit a note, like let's say middle C on the keyboard, that's note number 60. So basically what it does is it translates everything that you play into numbers. That's what MIDI is. And so there's the note, the actual note number, the note you're hitting, there's that data. There's how long you're holding the note for. And then there's how hard you're hitting the note to get velocity out of it. And those are pretty much the basic things in MIDI. It does a lot of more stuff, but those are the 3 things that if I could control that and put that, if I could change that into numbers and put it into a video game platform and a system, I'd be able to actually play music into a game as opposed to, trying to figure out how to program it. And so that's what I did. And I sat with programmers and I said, could you build me this thing? And this is what MIDI is and this and that. And so they did that. And so I would get these, so I was able to record my information into a computer, and it would translate it into numbers that I could then give to a programmer, and then they would translate it into what they knew. And, well, it sounded like crap. But then, and then so once I had all those numbers, I could then start to tweak them and mess with them to try to get it to sound good. So the systems were very limited to what you could do. And so, for example, let's take the Game Boy. The Game Boy had 4 audio channels. And each of these channels were monophonic, meaning you could only play one note off one channel. So if you wanted to play a chord, like on a piano or a guitar, you play a chord, that's 3 notes, that's 3 channels gone. So, I mean, it really makes you appreciate guys like Koji Kondo, the composer, Zelda and Mario, you know, what he was able to do with the NES, had the same sound chip as the Game Boy. And so you had 3 monophonic channels, and then the 4th channel was, it's called white noise, or the it didn't have a tone. It was just, and that's what we would use for percussion. And so you could kind of make it sound like a snare or a hi-hat or a, that's what, I'll probably heard that sound. And so that was the limit of the machine. So back then when we were doing music, and we also didn't have a lot of space because everything was cartridge based. So we didn't have any space and there was no budget and absolutely no time to do anything because audio back then, it wasn't really high on the priority list of things to put in a game, Everything was about graphics and the gameplay. And sometimes maybe if there was storytelling, that would be like, ooh, we had this one big picture at the end of the game, and that would take up half the cartridge, So audio was always like the very last thing. So we had no time, no money, no respect, no technology, nothing. So a lot of video game music back then was, it was very challenging. And so I wanted to help change all that. I wanted to say, hey, look, music is important. And if you give it space, and if you give it time, and if you give me this and that, we can make stuff sound really good. And the first time I was doing that, so that was the NES and the Game Boy. And so when I did Prince of Persia, I did it on those systems. And we made it sound pretty good. And my approach back then, too, to Prince of Persia was actually kind of interesting because back then, video game music, again, it was kind of simplistic bleeps and bloops for the most part. And so when I first got Prince of Persia, the producers were like, okay, well, there's 13 levels in the game, so give us 13 30-minute looping songs. And I said, well, instead of doing that, because that's just going to be annoying, why don't, and Prince of Persia was so cinematic at the time. You have to understand, back then, the animation on the Prince, no one had ever done anything like that before. And what Jordan did is he actually videotaped himself running and climbing over things and doing all these things. He videotaped himself with like a VHS camera. And then he would take that back, because he did all the art as well. And he went and he would do all of it. He would watch and he'd stop the different frames of animation and he would draw that on the computer with pixels. And so, the running and the stopping and the climbing, no one had ever done anything like that before. So it was very cinematic. And so I said, well, like a movie, they don't have music playing through the whole 2 hours. Silence is a good thing. And then, and then maybe when he picks up a potion, or when you open a door, or when you slay an enemy, or when you finish the level, then we can play music and it'll be more of like a reward. It was also my way of getting out writing 13 songs on a horrible system. And so that's what we did, and it was a big success. Because when you got to like the systems like the Genesis and Super Nintendo, if you go back and even listen to like Sonic the Hedgehog, which is amazing music, it's 45-second loops throughout the whole thing, because again, there was no space. And there wasn't a lot of like voice samples and stuff. So for the Genesis, that system, we had 6 channels. Ooh, we got 2 more channels. But the chip itself was called a FM synthesis chip, which a lot of the arcade machines worked. So it was more like an actual real synthesizer. And the other cool thing that the Genesis had that nobody really utilized, but I would take advantage of it all the time. So you had the 6 channels, like I said. Now, one of those channels, one of those 6, was actually a sample channel. So you could actually do voice or, things. So, people would use it very sparingly, and then, like, fight, begin. You would just hear it like, in fact, Sonic the Hedgehog, the only time you ever heard it was when you first put the cartridge in and go, Sega, right? And that was it. And so I said, well, geez, I have this sample channel. I'm going to thrash the heck out of it. If I can get enough space and I can convince. And so I did a little test where I used it for snare drum. I used it for like guitar hits and big orchestra hits. I used it for really fun sound effects and things like that. And what I would do is I'd prioritize all the different channels. So I would write the music in 6 channels, but if a sound effect happened, then I would, and if it was a really important power-up or something, I would give that like the highest priority. And so, and then I would look at the music and say, okay, out of these 6 channels, if I took one away, would it still sound okay? And so that's how we would prioritize the thing. And when the reality is when a big sound effect or something would hit, it would kind of mask the music anyway for a split second. So it was really, you could really, do some good stuff. But again, you had to prioritize everything. Every single sound effect in the whole game had to have a priority because, so you had your music underneath, and then maybe, you were shooting a gun, and that took precedent. But then if you got a power up, you wanted that to take over for the gun. So you had to always be really super smart in the way that you that you did your priorities and stuff. And then the Genesis also had 3 other voices, which were those same, they were called PSG voices. They were those bleeps and bloops, sine waves, that the Game Boy and NES had. And those 3 things no one ever used, but I would always use them, because what I would do is you could take a sine wave, if you put a really long attack on it and a really long decay, so instead of sounding like Mario, the sounds from Mario, the beeps, or Tetris, it's a beep, it's like ee, that kind of thing. But if you put a long attack on it, you could get it to go and then decay it really long. So what I would do is I would set those 3 channels up like that, and then I would use it as like digital delay or reverb if I was doing like some kind of funky guitar solo. So, and so what I would do is I would write the guitar solo line with one of the FM things. I'd try to get it to sound like a guitar as much as I could. And then I'd make 3 different copies of that, and then I'd stagger them all like, a couple hundredths of a second, each one like this. And then I would play them, all 3, but then I would take the volumes down every single time on each of the channels. So you could get, so you'd hear meow, and then you'd hear meow, meow, meow. And it would kind of sound like digital delay in the Genesis. But I would thrash the heck out of that channel. So if anyone here played a game like Earthworm Jim, for example, the sample channel is being hit constantly. With either sound effects or Jim's voice or guitar hits or all these different things. And and so when I started doing music like this, and everyone was like, wow, this sounds really cool, we've never heard stuff like this. So they actually ended up giving me more cartridge space. So that was very cool. When the Super Nintendo came out, they had 8 channels of audio, and they were all sample channels. So that was kind of neat. And so games like ActRaiser, kind of, you could actually feel like it was a real symphony. That was pretty cool, And so it was funny, though, the way you had to get the samples, because Nintendo had a proprietary system that they had set up. Nintendo's weird like that, but everything's super proprietary to them and everything, And so we literally, if I wanted to get like a violin sound, I would have to send the sound to Nintendo as a recording. They would then sample it in and then loop it and then send it back to me. And it's funny because the name of the files they would send back were called .sol files. Because they didn't want anyone to know what their compression routine, if you can, S out of luck is what it stood for. SH out of luck, right? So anyway, and so that's what that's how they named their files. And so you would get these things back from Nintendo like 2 months later. It was just awful. And if it came back kind of crappy, well, too bad, you were SOL. And so that was really fun. So. And then the whole game changed. Pardon the pun. When when we were able to get CD-ROMs as storage mediums, right? So Sega CD was one of the first to do it. Of course, you had PC CD-ROM just coming out. I worked on one of the first big PC CD-ROM games called The Seventh Guest, which was one of the games that actually helped to sell. Millions of people bought CD-ROMs just so they could play Seventh Guest. It was kind of like Myst kind of ripped us off, but it was a game like Myst before Myst came out. So CD-ROMs, now that we had CD-ROMs, it was really strange. It was a really strange time. This is like 1993, 94. And I was all excited because I'm a musician and composer. I'm not a computer programmer, right? So I was really excited about this medium. And so I started creating real music. So I was recording. I'm a guitar player and a piano player. So I was recording live guitar and bass and drums and keyboard and piano and everything. But if you remember the Sega CD and the games back in '94, they were still very pixelated and very kind of, old school. And so I would do this real music, and people were so used to hearing bleeps and bloops in video games that one of the first games I worked on for the Sega CD was the Terminator. And so it kind of really had 8-bit, 16-bit kind of graphics, but you heard real rock music coming out of the system. And I can remember I got in massive arguing matches and fights with the producers of the game, because they were like, well, this doesn't sound like a video game. It sounds like somebody's album. And I'm like, yes, exactly, that's the point. And they said, well, it doesn't match the game. I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? They said, well, just do, bleep, 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 but make it with guitars and stuff. And I was really adamantly against that. And so literally half the company was like against me and half the company was for me. So it finally went up to the president of Virgin. I worked at the company was called Virgin Games. And it was Richard Branson, Virgin Airlines, Virgin Records, Virgin Megastores. He had started a video game company. And it went all the way up, and of course he had Virgin Records and Virgin Music, and he was all about real music, and he didn't really know too much about video games really, except that he owned a company. And so it literally went all the way up to Richard, and he was there, and he says, well, play me this music. Well, play me the music, And we played him the music. He heard like about 20 seconds of it. He's like, this is great, put this in the game. So that was the end of that after 6 months of battling with, with all the producers. And so, and the game ended up winning award for Best Music of the Year that year, so I really stuck it to them. I had fun on that one. For Christmas, I gave them all the soundtrack on CD. And in fact, that same year, so Capitol Records, Virgin was owned like by EMI, and they owned Capitol Records and this and that. And so I went to Capitol Records came to us and they said, hey, we'd like to put our catalog into video games, license the music into video games now that you have this whole CD thing going on. And I said, yeah, that's great. I said, I got an even better idea. What if we do a video game soundtrack album? And they're like, why would we do that? Who would want to listen to video game music? That's stupid. And so I said, well, I'll make you a deal. I'll put some of your music in our games, but you give me a record deal. And they're like, okay, kid, whatever. And so they did, and the very first video game soundtrack ever was called Tommy Tallarico's Greatest Hits, Volume 1. I had a greatest hits before I had a career. It was awesome. And I had music from the Terminator and Cool Spot and Global Gladiators, a bunch of other games that I'd worked on. But it was all done on a CD. And it was so funny. It was kind of heartbreaking because I was like all super excited. It's like Capitol Records, oh my gosh, this is like so amazing. And I can remember the first day I went to the record store to like, you know, see, I'm like looking through all the things, like to see your CD there. I was like, oh my God, tears in my eyes, right? I ended up having tears in my eyes for different reasons. I walked into the store and I'm like all excited. I walk over to T. I'm like, TA, talk. Okay, Tallarico. Oh, there's nothing here. Okay, well, let me see where. You know, maybe it's in soundtracks. Yeah, that's it. Maybe. So I go over to the soundtracks section. I'm like, you know, greatest hits, nothing there. Son of a. So I go up to the counter and this dude behind the counter, and I said, "Hi, I'm looking for that Tommy Tallarico Greatest Hits album." And he's like, let me check the computer on that. He goes, oh yeah, we got that. It's over in the sound effects section. So it's like bird calls, you know, and this video game sound effect album, I guess. People didn't know what the heck it was. So I was pretty heartbroken. But anyway, it ended up selling like 25,000 units, and they made money on it. And it was the very first video game soundtrack album that was ever put out, and it was put out worldwide by a major record company. So that was kind of cool. But anyway, so once you started doing live music, now here's actually a trivia question for you. See if anyone knows. Actually, if anyone knows this, I'm totally giving you one of these right now. This is our Video Games Live. It's our third album that just came out this year. It's got music from Final Fantasy VIII, Chrono Cross, Skyrim, Tetris, Zelda, Warcraft, Monkey Island, Beyond Good and Evil, Pokemon, Silent Hill 2, Journey, Dota 2, Shadow of the Colossus, Street Fighter 2, and Still Alive. Okay, recorded with a 100-piece orchestra, 100-person choir, mixed at Skywalker Ranch at George Lucas's house for a week. And yeah, so anyway, okay, here's my trivia question. First one. What was the very first video game? This is kind of a trick question, but maybe somebody knows it. What was the very... Hold on, now what was the first video game? Hold on, I wasn't done with the question, sorry. What was it? I'll do one for that though. What was the very first video game that recorded a live orchestra, that had a live orchestra recording in the video game?
Prince of Persia?
Prince of Persia? No, I was on bleeps and bloops back then. Green shirt. Phantasy Star, that's a good guess, but not correct. Right there. Final Fantasy, another great guess, but not correct. In the back. Total Annihilation, Jeremy Soule, guy composer for Skyrim. Not correct. Right here. Dungeons and Dragons. Ooh, that's close. That's going in the genre of this game, sort of. Baldur's Gate. No, I'm gonna give you a hint. You're all thinking like in the 90s, and it's actually not. It's a game that came out in the 80s.
Oh no, I don't got it.
Okay, it came out in 1985. No cheating on your phones. Castlevania? Nope. Space Invaders, 1977. Nope.
Oh god, that Don Bluth game.
The Don Bluth game?
Dragon's Lair!
Well, now you had some help. Dragon's Lair was the very first. It's the very first. What should I do? What should I do now? I gotta give it to him. Come on up. He knew it. There you go. And who shouted out Dragon's Lair right here? Dragon's Lair, I gotta give you one too. Naughty boy, but still, he did throw it out. I made it fair, you gotta make it fair. There you go. So Dragon's Lair, yeah, because the game was on a laser disc. Christopher Stone was the composer, and he had done a lot of Don Bluth stuff in the past. And yeah, because it was on a laser disc, they actually recorded, it was a cartoon, and they recorded a live orchestra. So, trick question there, Dragon's Lair. So anyway, so yeah, and then the whole kind of industry changed from 1995 on because of the audio, and we're able to have CDs. But it didn't change right away, because the game industry didn't really have the budgets, and it really didn't have the talent at that time. There wasn't a lot of video game composers back then, because again, they were making this transition from game programmers. Like, I was one of the first people who wasn't a game programmer, who was just a musician in the industry. And then of course, more people started coming in, and then by like the mid-90s, you know, tons of people were coming in, and film composers were now coming in to, you know, to work on games. But we didn't have the budgets yet. So we didn't have the amount of money to record a big live orchestra and to record a different, different musicians or guitarists and things like that. And there was studio time, and then you had to mix it and master it and do all those different things. So, so it took some years of going, and it wasn't really until the end of the century that you saw games like Halo and Metal Gear Solid and some of the, you know, the great Uematsu stuff, and Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and 9 and 10. And Kingdom Hearts and games like, you know, Myst had some live orchestral stuff too. Myst 3 and 4, some of the later ones. And so it really wasn't until, you know, 2000s that these games started to where all games, it was kind of, you know, proper to have symphonies in there, and to have, you know, by the time the PlayStation 2 came out, the industry had really changed from a money standpoint, and, you know, it went from like a, you know, $2 billion industry to like a $20 billion industry, thanks to like the PlayStation and the Xbox and Nintendo. So, you know, and the PC industry and massively multiplayer games, and Warcraft were coming out and things like that. So the industry really, really blew up, and you had the DS as well. And so it was an amazing time. And so that was really fun to see the explosion of live orchestras in games. But you know, the interesting thing about game music, and people ask me this all the time, people say, what era of game music did you like the most? Was it kind of the old school stuff, or, you know, or the newer stuff? And everybody tends to like what they grew up on, you know? So a lot of people feel that video game music from the 80s and early 90s was way better than the music now. What you're forgetting is all the bad music from the 80s and 90s. We only remember Castlevania and Mega Man and Tetris and Mario and Zelda and Metroid. We always remember all the great stuff, but we forget Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, E.T., you know, there were some awful games, awful sounding games back then, but we only remember the great ones. And to that end, video game music today, people are like, oh, there's no good video game music today. And then I remind them of Warcraft and God of War and Metal Gear Solid and Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy and Halo and Shadow of the Colossus and on and on and on and on, Pokemon, and on and on. And so there's just as much good music as there was back then too. So my answer is always, I love them both, because I think they both have their merits. One of the main things, though, that changed when the PlayStation 2 and Xbox came around was our ability to write interactive music. So what we were able to do, like, on a big scale is, so if you can imagine this, and the way video game music is written now, is that if you can imagine the big difference between video game music and any other music in the history of the universe is that when you play a video game, you become that character. And the music becomes the soundtrack of your life as you're playing that character. And so people are so attached to video game music, more so than any other kind of music, because it becomes your music. You know, when you're battling, you know, when you're trying to save your village and battling these people, and that theme is going, that becomes your theme. Or when you've, you know, gone for 10 hours trying to complete this quest, and you finally open that chest and you get that victory music, it's like you start humming that for the rest of the week, you know? And so you know, I'll give you an example. Let's take a really great film, one of the biggest grossing films of all time, Avatar. Fantastic storyline, beautiful visuals, great acting, great story, great worlds, great storytelling, great music too. Can you hum it to me? Can anyone hum me the music to Avatar? Didn't even know you had music in it, right? They say with movie scores, they say the best film scores are the ones that you don't even realize are there. Now, I disagree with that. I mean, John Williams to me is like, you know, right up there with Beethoven, you know? Superman, E.T., Jaws, Star Wars, Raiders of the Lost Ark, hello, Jurassic Park, hello, you know, Harry Potter. And so, Raiders of the Lost, yeah, I said that, okay. And those are memorable themes because they play them right at the beginning of the you know, or the best scene in the movie. But with video games, it's like we have the action scene and the opening scene every level. Every level's action with us. So we get to do this incredible thematic music mostly all the time, which is very different from film music because it's considered background music a lot of time, or incidental music. The reason of that, of course, is because films are telling a story. That's what it is. It's telling a story. And how do you do that? Mostly through dialogue. So there's talking throughout the entire film. Whereas with video games, it's interactivity and action and fun that drives our medium. And so the music, it's like, again, it's like the chase scene every second, you know? So the music is always out front. I call what we do foreground music, not background music, right? So we're in the front. We are in charge of driving the action. If I'm in a cave, let's say you're in a game and it's just black, it's total darkness, and you're in a cave. Depending on what music I write is going to influence what you do. So for example, if I have kind of like this mysterious music, it's like, oh, I better search around for something. Or if I have this really super scary, creepy music, you're like, oh no, something's about to attack me. You know, right? So, or let's say you had this scene with no audio, with no music. Let's say it was a scene, you were crossing a field, right? And the camera's going really fast, and you're going through a field, and then all of a sudden it comes up on a cliff and a big vista, and the camera stops. Now, depending on the style of music I write for that, if it's a chase, dun 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 dun, and I get to the cliff and it's like, ah! That's how your attitude's going to be. But if I'm writing really beautiful music, da 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 da, you know, and it's like, oh, this is all so beautiful. Oh, look at this awesome vista, you know. And so we control the emotion, and Beethoven was always into that with his music, you know, like Beethoven's, you know. Dun 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 dun, dun 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 dun, Beethoven's Fifth. They asked Beethoven, they said, what is that? What were you thinking? And he said, that's fate knocking at your door. And so Beethoven's whole thing, before Beethoven was around, the style of music before that was called Baroque music. And it was very, some people love Baroque. I'm not a fan. Bach was, you know, it was, and it was that for hours. And Beethoven, when Beethoven and Mozart, they were around the same time. And when Beethoven came on the scene, he wanted his music to give people emotion, to give people feeling. Dun 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 dun! What the heck was that? Dun 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 dun! Oh my God, you know, and you know, where Beethoven's nice. Da 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 da. It's so joyous and happy. And Ode to Joy was what it was called, and based on a poem. And so that was, people thought that was like the devil's music back then. Beethoven was like whoa, what's all this emotional stuff I'm feeling here? Music's not supposed to do that. You know, and he must be Satan. All through, you know, you have good music when that's the, I guess, you know, Elvis Presley, they said the same thing, right? And so, and video game music they did for a while too. And so that power, that emotion is something, and I always said that if Beethoven were alive today, he'd be a video game composer. There's no doubt in my mind, you know? He wouldn't be a film composer, he wouldn't want people talking over his music all the time. And so we try to do the same thing that Beethoven did. We want to create this emotion because it's what drives what you're doing. It drives the action and the energy of what's going on. And so a lot of times when I'm writing music for video games, I really try to get a cadence. I try to get, like, you know, if you're on a horse, what's kind of the tempo of the beat? Or if it's a character, a 2D scroller, how's he running, or is he walking, or what's going on? So a lot of times, I want to know what the emotion is. And so many people fail sometimes because they do video game music and they always attach it to whatever the level is. So for example, it's like, I mean, you know, there's like 5 video game worlds to begin with, right? There's Ice World, and Lava World, and Castle World, and Swampland, and, you know, and what's the name? The sewer, Crystal World, you know, it's all the same, right? The sewer, yeah, totally. And so a lot of times it's like, okay, we're in the jungle, so now we got to write jungle music. You know, now we're in Ice World. Ice World is another one. Ice World, so we have to get all tinkly and high notes and ding, 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 you know. And so, but for me, it's like I want to know what the character is going through. Is he being chased, or is he chasing somebody? It's 2 totally different things. Is he afraid? Is he scared? Is he sad? Is he happy? Is he determined? Is he mad? Is he angry? Is it, you know? And that's where I start. And then I'll get the cadence of kind of like how they're moving, maybe, if there's any movement at all. So then, and the other thing, but I started down this path to tell you about the interactivity of it all. Oh my gosh, it's only almost time up. And so the interactivity of it all is really cool because the great John Williams had to sit down with George Lucas at some point during Star Wars, and George Lucas said to him, okay, at 1 minute and 38 seconds, the music must do this because Darth Vader just walked through the door. And then at 3 minutes and 24 seconds, the music must do this because the Death Star just blew up. So John Williams is really, it's already mapped out for him. He's got to just kind of fill in the gaps. Not fun for a composer. Not overly fun. I mean, I'm sure it's fun, but I'll tell you what's more fun when a designer comes up to you and says, okay, here's the scenario. We got 100 guys on horseback with swords all coming to attack you. Write me a 3-minute piece of music. Wow, now my mind can start going crazy. And the cool thing is, and here's where it gets interactive, the cool thing is I can then sit down with the designer and the programmer and the producer and say, okay, how about we do this? So there's 100 guys, and I'm going to go all out, and it's going to be 100-person choir, and it's going to be you know, there's going to be timpanis going off, all percussion and big taiko drums, and the violins are going to do 30-second notes. I'm going to have the horns blaring. There's going to be men choir and female choir and children's choir. Ah, total madness. And then, when there's 50 people, maybe I'm going to take the children's choir out. Maybe I'm going to not play the taiko drums, and maybe maybe the violins are going to do 16th notes instead of 32nd notes. Same song, but just orchestrated differently. And then maybe there's 10 people, and 5 people, and 2 people, and 1 person, and no people at all. So I can write this song, the bombastic version in my head, and then record it 5 or 6 different ways, different levels. And all, you know, and then maybe by the other version. Again, it's the same tempo, it's the same beat. So when we go into the studio, I create what's called a click track. So it's, whatever the tempo is, it's right in the person's ear, right? So they know exactly, like a metronome, yeah. And so it's going off in their ear, but instead of going chun 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 with the violins, I write it same tempo, but go chun 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 chun. Chun chun chun, chun chun chun, and then chun 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 John? Same song, same notes, but different orchestration of it. And when you lay this all out in the game system, here's what I do. So when the battle starts, I'm actually triggering everything at the same time. 32 channels of audio all going, but you don't hear them all. Because I've muted, I'm only letting out the ones that I want you to hear for that, but they're all in sync together, but you just don't hear it. If you were to actually unmute everything, it sounds like complete garbage, right? And then I'll tell the programmer, look, when this happens, I want you to do a 7-second fade out of the old music and do a 7-second cross fade in of these 6 tracks. And I'm going to keep some of them, but I'm going to add these and take away these. Bam! And then the best example of this, if anyone's played Red Dead Redemption, have you played this game? It's one of my favorite games of all time. Yeah. Play that game and listen to the audio. It is mind-blowing. They didn't do it with an orchestra, but they were doing it with, basses. So you get on the horse, dun, 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 and the bass line's going, and then the more people that are starting to chase you and everything, they're adding more instruments, and they're adding all these things and the harmonicas, and everything's going in. 5 minutes? Oh boy! I thought, okay, I guess I only have 50 minutes. Okay. Afterwards, I'm just going to go out there and answer questions or do whatever we need to do. Okay, so anyway, does anyone have any questions here, though, so everyone can hear? Hack.
So what do you think of the older composers that came before you? People doing things on like the Commodore 64.
Yeah, Jesper Kidd and Charles Deanan and Rob Hubbard's one of my close personal friends. Yeah, they're amazing because they had even less restrictions than I did. So the composers of the 80s, and there's only a handful of them. I think we named every one of them. Koji Kondo, Tim Follin and his brother. Oh. I know it well, and those guys are Rock and Roll Racing. Those guys knocked it out of the park for the Super Nintendo. Great stuff. Yeah, those guys are just amazing, and they were all computer programmers. Every one of those guys were programmers too. Right here.
Yeah, I was wondering, what do you see for the future of video games?
Future of video game audio? You know what? We've hit the ceiling. I mean, we can right now do, with the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4, we can do 7.1 surround. We can have 64 channels of audio going at 24-bit, 96 kilohertz if we wanted to, all streaming at once. So technically, we can't get any higher. And that's great, because that's really made a huge jump from 20 years ago, right? No other part, graphics have come a long way as well too, but audio, the graphics still haven't hit their ceiling yet. Photorealism is sort of getting there, but it's not there yet. With audio, the quality can't get any better. So I'm just excited about the new composers, the new, guys like Austin Wintory, who did Journey, unbelievable. Gary Scheinman, who did BioShock. There's some amazing composers who are just coming up with great stuff. So right here. Square for the SNES, yeah. Secret of Mana, Chrono, yeah. They just, in the old days, a song would take like a day to write and then 3 weeks to get it to sound like something. So it's just the mastery of what those guys were able to accomplish. And Yasunori Matsuda, a very good friend of mine, he just played with us in China in Video Games Live last month. And it's sitting there, and he would write the music out on paper and then put it into notes, notate it into the software. And it was the samples. That was the thing he spent the most time on, was trying to get those samples to sound like something. Now, when I worked on Aladdin, I spent a lot of time trying to get something to sound like an oboe or trying to get it to sound like a flute. I spent more time doing that than actually, converting the music and writing some of my own. Green hat in the back.
What is your favorite soundtrack you've worked on and
Favorite soundtrack I've worked on, and favorite I haven't. My favorite one that I've worked on, and I'm not just saying this because I'm in Salt Lake City, but it was Advent Rising, and we recorded the. I mean, I'm 100% Italian, and I wrote an Italian opera for a video game. So, you know, to me, it was like a dream come true. I recorded the Mormon Tabernacle Choir right over here, and we did. So not only did we do the game here, but we recorded a lot of it here. And Earthworm Jim is another favorite of mine. One that I didn't do, for me, the master is Nobuo Uematsu, and his score for Final Fantasy VIII as a body of work, Libere Fatale, Eyes on Me, is the greatest soundtrack ever written for a video game. Right?
Why did you choose video games versus, you're a great guitar player, I've seen your video games live.
Uh-huh. Why did I choose video games over maybe a more traditional music and this and that? I'll tell you why. My two greatest loves growing up were video games and music. And I put my two loves together. You know, my grandfather would always tell me, you want to be successful at something, do something you love. And I couldn't decide on which one I love more, so I just put them two together. When I was 10 years old, it's 1977, I'm dating myself now, but I used to put on video game concerts for my friends in the neighborhood. I would go down to the arcade and record all like Space Invaders and Asteroids and Pac-Man and stuff. Actually, well, Pac-Man was 1980, but I'd record all my favorite video game sounds in my Intellivision and Atari, and I'd put them on cassette, and I'd play the cassette back, and I'd jump up in front of the TV with video games behind me, and I'd play guitar along with it, invite my friends over, and charge them a nickel. And they're telling me it's all over now, unfortunately, but I'm just going to head right out here. So I invite everyone to come on out there if they'd like. Thank you. Thank you. Here. You get to all the questions.
Yeah, mate. I'm gonna go ahead and